The crack of a bullet splintered the wooden sign above Nora Sullivan's head, sending her diving behind a water trough as a cloud of dust billowed around her. In the blazing Arizona heat of 1875, death had nearly found her again, and she was growing weary of its persistent pursuit. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to kill her since she'd arrived in Copper Creek, and she doubted it would be the last. "You missed, Marshall," she shouted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Your aim's as crooked as your badge." Another shot rang out, hitting the trough inches from her face. Water trickled from the new hole, soaking the parched dirt beneath her boots. "Next one's between your eyes, Sullivan," Marshall Dawson bellowed from across the street. "You've got till sundown to clear out of my town." Nora peered over the edge of the trough, seeing the lawman's red face contorted with rage. Behind him stood a gathering crowd of townsfolk, watching the spectacle with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. None would step forward to help her. They all knew better than to cross the marshal. She'd learned quickly that justice in Copper Creek came at the price of Dawson's approval, and she'd lost that the moment she'd refused his advances. "This isn't your town," she called back, "and I'm not leaving until I've settled what I came for." A new voice cut through the tension, deep and calm. "I believe the lady has made her position clear, Marshall." The crowd parted as a tall figure stepped forward, the sun at his back casting his face in shadow. All Nora could make out was the silhouette of a cowboy hat and the glint of a star pinned to a dusty leather vest. "Stay out of this, Travis," the marshal warned. "This doesn't concern you." "When you're shooting at unarmed women in the middle of the street, it concerns anyone with a conscience," the man replied, his boots making deliberate sounds against the hard-packed dirt as he approached. As he drew closer, Nora could finally see his face tanned and weathered, with eyes the color of a summer storm. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into several days' worth of stubble. Travis Blackwood, the new deputy she'd heard whispers about but hadn't yet encountered. "This woman is wanted for theft and murder in 3 territories," Marshall Dawson declared loudly for the benefit of the crowd. Nora stood up slowly, hands raised. "That's a lie and you know it. I've stolen nothing but what was rightfully mine to begin with." Deputy Blackwood's eyes narrowed as he studied her. "Is that so?" "I came to claim my father's property after his death," she explained, her gaze unflinching. "The marshal here seems to think a woman has no right to inherit." "Your father was a no-good prospector who died owing this town," Dawson spat. "My father discovered the copper vein that gave this town its name," Nora shot back, "and the deed to his claim is legal and binding." Travis looked between them, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to the marshal. "Put your gun away, sir. We'll settle this according to the law, not with bullets in the street." "I am the law here, deputy," Dawson growled, but he holstered his weapon nonetheless. "Then act like it," Travis replied evenly. He turned to Nora. "Miss, I suggest you come to the office so we can sort this out properly." Nora hesitated, eyeing the marshal with distrust. "I give you my word no harm will come to you," Travis added quietly. Something in his eyes, perhaps a flicker of genuine concern, made her decision. Nora stepped forward, brushing dust from her skirts. "Fine," she said, "but I'm keeping my knife." A corner of Travis's mouth turned up. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As they walked toward the sheriff's office, the marshal stomped ahead of them, muttering curses under his breath. Travis fell into step beside Nora. "You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest, Miss Sullivan," he observed. "I didn't come looking for trouble," she replied, "but I won't back down from it either. So I've noticed." There was something like admiration in his voice. "Most people who stand up to Marshall Dawson don't live long enough to regret it." "I'm not most people." "No," he agreed, studying her with those stormy eyes. I don't believe you are. Nora felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest but quickly suppressed it. She'd learned long ago that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially when it came to men with badges. Inside the sheriff's office, Marshall Dawson was already rifling through papers, pulling out wanted posters and slapping them onto his desk. "Here," he said triumphantly, jabbing his finger at a sketch that bore only the vaguest resemblance to Nora. "Nora Sullivan, wanted in Colorado for theft of mining equipment." "That's not me," she said flatly. "And we both know it." Travis picked up the poster, examining it closely. "This woman is described as being in her 40s with a scar across her cheek." He looked at Nora, who was clearly in her mid-20s with unblemished skin. "Doesn't match our guest." Dawson's face reddened further. "She's lying about her identity." "My name is Nora Sullivan," she stated firmly. "Daughter of Thomas Sullivan, who died 3 months ago in a mining accident that I suspect wasn't entirely accidental." She fixed the marshal with an accusing stare. "You're making dangerous allegations, miss," Dawson warned. "I'm making observations based on facts," she countered. "My father wrote to me regularly. In his last letter, he mentioned threats from someone powerful in town who wanted his claim. A week later, I received word he'd died in a cave-in." Travis leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "And you came to investigate." "I came to claim what's rightfully mine and find out what happened to my father," Nora said. "I have the deed to his property and mining claim right here." She reached into her pocket and produced a folded document. Travis took it, unfolding it carefully. "This appears to be in order." "It's a forgery," Dawson insisted. "It has the territorial seal," Travis pointed out, "and it's dated 6 years ago. Hard to forge that." The marshal's hand twitched near his gun. "The Sullivan claim belongs to the town now. He died with debts." "Show me the proof of these debts," Nora challenged. A tense silence filled the room. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, dust motes dancing in the beams of light that filtered through the dirty windows. "I'll need time to gather the documentation," Dawson finally said. "I'm sure you will," Nora replied sarcastically. Travis cleared his throat. "Until this matter is resolved legally, Miss Sullivan has the right to remain in town undisturbed." He gave the marshal a pointed look, and unshot at. Dawson's jaw clenched. "Fine. But she stays away from the Sullivan property until this is settled." "That's not," Nora began to protest, but Travis cut her off with a subtle shake of his head. "Agreed," he said. "Miss Sullivan, where are you staying?" "The boarding house, though Mrs. Winters may have second thoughts about hosting me after today's excitement." "I'll escort you back and make sure there's no misunderstanding," Travis offered. He turned to Dawson. "Marshal, I expect those documents proving the debt by tomorrow." With a final glare at Nora, Dawson stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Once they were alone, Travis handed the deed back to Nora. "He won't find any legitimate proof of debt." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've been watching him since I arrived 6 months ago," Travis said quietly. "There's something not right in this town, and it centers around him and the mine owner, Bartholomew Reeves." Nora tucked the deed safely away. "Why are you helping me?" "I'm not helping you," Travis replied. "I'm upholding the law. There's a difference." "Not in my experience." He studied her for a long moment. "What happened to make you so distrustful?" "Life," she answered simply. "I've learned not to put my faith in badges or promises." "Fair enough." He reached for his hat. "Let me walk you back to the boarding house. The marshal's temper will cool, but his friends might be looking to earn his favor." Outside, the town had returned to its usual afternoon activities, though Nora noticed people watching her from doorways and windows. News traveled fast in small towns like Copper Creek. "You've made quite an impression for someone who's only been here a week," Travis observed as they walked down the dusty Main Street. "How did you know I've been here a week?" A smile flickered across his face. "Deputy, remember, it's my job to know who comes and goes." "And what else do you know about me, Deputy Blackwood?" "I know you arrived on the stage from Denver. You checked into the boarding house under your own name. You visited the assayer's office 3 times, the bank twice, and you've been asking questions about your father that have made certain people uncomfortable." Nora raised an eyebrow. "You've been watching me." "Observing," he corrected. "There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing." They reached the boarding house, a 2-story wooden structure with a small porch and window boxes filled with struggling marigolds. Mrs. Winters, a plump woman with perpetually worried eyes, was sweeping the porch with vigorous strokes. "Mrs. Winters," Travis greeted her, tipping his hat. "I trust Miss Sullivan's room is still available." The landlady looked between them, her broom pausing mid-sweep. "Well, Deputy, after that commotion, folks are talking. Having a woman who draws gunfire isn't good for business." "The marshal was out of line," Travis said firmly. "Miss Sullivan is a legitimate businesswoman with legal concerns in town. I'd consider it a personal favor if you'd continue to extend her your hospitality." Mrs. Winters sighed. "Very well, Deputy." "But if there's any more trouble, there won't be," he assured her, though Nora wasn't convinced of that herself. As Mrs. Winters went back inside, Nora turned to Travis. "Thank you, but I don't need you fighting my battles." "I'm not fighting anything," he replied. "Just evening the odds a bit." "Why?" His expression grew serious. "Because something's not right in this town and you showing up has stirred the pot. Maybe that's exactly what was needed." Nora studied him, trying to discern his true motives. "What's your stake in all this, Deputy?" "Justice," he said simply. "Nothing more." She laughed softly, the sound devoid of humor. "Justice is a luxury few can afford." "Perhaps," he conceded, "but I'm stubborn enough to keep trying anyway." He stepped back, tipping his hat again. "Lock your door tonight, Miss Sullivan, and maybe push that heavy dresser in front of it." "I always do," she replied. As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Deputy," he paused, looking back. "I'm not easy to love, you know," she said, the words surprising even her. "Or to trust, or to help." Travis regarded her with those storm cloud eyes, his expression softening slightly. "Then I'll work for it every day," he replied quietly. "That's the only way anything worthwhile ever comes about." Before she could respond, he walked away, his tall figure disappearing down the street toward the sheriff's office. Nora watched him go, a strange feeling settling in her chest. It wasn't trust, she was far too wise for that, but perhaps it was the first seedling of hope she'd felt in a very long time. Inside her room, Nora sat on the edge of the narrow bed, pulling her father's last letter from her pocket. She'd read it so many times the paper was beginning to wear thin at the folds. Her father had been excited about a new vein he'd discovered, one rich enough to set us up proper, as he'd written. But he'd also mentioned trouble men watching his claim, threats from someone powerful in town. "I won't let them take what's yours, Pa," she whispered to the empty room. "I promise." A soft knock at her door startled her. Hand moving to the knife at her waist, she approached cautiously. "Who is it?" "Nancy, madam. Mrs. Winters' girl. I've brought you some supper." Nora opened the door a crack to see a young woman of perhaps 16 holding a tray with a bowl of stew and a chunk of bread. "Mrs. Winters thought you might prefer to eat in your room tonight," Nancy explained, her eyes darting nervously down the hallway. "That's very kind. Thank you." Nora accepted the tray, noticing a folded piece of paper tucked under the napkin. She raised a questioning eyebrow. Nancy leaned closer, whispering, "The deputy asked me to give you that, said it was important." After the girl hurried away, Nora unfolded the note. Meet me at the livery stable at dawn. I know where your father's missing journal is. TB. Nora's heart quickened. Her father's journal, the one he'd mentioned in his letters, where he recorded all his findings and suspicions, had been missing from his belongings when she'd finally gained access to them. If Travis knew where it was, it could be the key to proving what had really happened to her father. But it could also be a trap. She tucked the note into her pocket. Trust didn't come easily to her, but sometimes risk was necessary. If there was even a chance of finding her father's journal, she had to take it. Setting the tray aside, she began to prepare for tomorrow. Whatever dawn brought, she would be ready. The night passed slowly, each creak and distant shout making Nora reach for her knife. Sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by dreams of her father's voice calling to her from deep in the earth. By the time the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, she was already dressed and ready. She slipped out of the boarding house while Mrs. Winters was still snoring loudly in her room downstairs. The streets of Copper Creek were quiet at this hour, with only a few miners heading to the early shift and the occasional rooster announcing the new day. The livery stable sat at the edge of town, a large wooden structure that smelled of hay and horses. As Nora approached, she kept to the shadows, watching for any sign of a trap. No unusual movement caught her eye, but caution had become second nature to her. She slipped through the side door, the familiar scent of horses and leather washing over her. In the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls, she could make out the shapes of stalls and the dark forms of sleeping horses. "Deputy," she called softly. Movement near the back of the stable caught her attention. Travis stepped out from behind a stall, his expression serious. "You came," he said, sounding slightly surprised. "Your note mentioned my father's journal. I'd walk through fire for that." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I think I know where it is, but retrieving it won't be easy." "Where?" "In Marshall Dawson's office. There's a safe behind the painting of the territorial governor." Nora's eyes narrowed. "And how do you know that's where my father's journal is?" "2 nights ago, I overheard Dawson and Reeves, the mine owner, arguing. Reeves was demanding something called Sullivan's book, saying it contained details that could ruin them. Dawson assured him it was locked away safe. And you think they meant my father's journal? It fits. Your father was documenting something that scared them enough to." He trailed off. "To kill him," Nora finished, her voice hard. Travis didn't deny it. "The marshal leaves for his rounds at noon. He'll be gone for at least 2 hours while he visits the outlying ranches. You're suggesting we break into the safe while he's gone?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Travis replied carefully. "I'm simply informing you of the marshal's schedule." Nora studied him, trying to read his intentions. "Why are you really helping me, deputy? And don't say justice again. There's more to it." Travis was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, more personal. "6 months ago, I was a ranger in Texas. My partner and I were investigating a series of claim jumpers who'd been driving small miners off their land, sometimes violently. We followed the trail north, all the way to Copper Creek." "Your partner," Nora said slowly, realization dawning. "What happened to him?" "Found dead in an alley. Tragic barroom brawl, according to Marshall Dawson's report." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. "Only problem was, Daniel didn't drink, never touched a drop in his life." "So you took the deputy job to investigate from the inside?" Travis nodded. "I've been gathering evidence, building a case to take to the territorial authorities, but it's been slow going. Dawson is careful." "Until I showed up asking questions about my father's claim," Nora said. "You've got them rattled. Whatever your father discovered, they're scared of it coming to light. A horse snorted in a nearby stall, making Nora jump slightly. Through the cracks in the eastern wall, sunlight was beginning to stream in more strongly. "We should go," Travis said. "People will be about soon, and it wouldn't do for us to be seen together like this." "What's the plan for the journal?" "Meet me behind the assayer's office at noon. I'll create a distraction if needed, but with luck, you'll have a clear path to the marshal's office." "The combination to the safe is 1836-9. Nora raised an eyebrow. "How do you know the combination?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I've been deputy for 6 months. I've had time to observe." She nodded. "Noon, then." As she turned to leave, he caught her arm gently. "Nora, be careful. These men have killed to protect their secrets." The use of her first name startled her, as did the genuine concern in his eyes. For a moment, she felt something stir within her, a dangerous warmth she'd long ago taught herself to suppress. "I'm always careful, deputy," she replied, pulling her arm free. "It's how I've stayed alive this long." Morning dragged by with excruciating slowness. Nora spent it in her room, cleaning her father's revolver, a Colt single-action army that had been among his personal effects, and mentally preparing for what lay ahead. Breaking into the marshal's safe in broad daylight was foolhardy at best, suicidal at worst. But if her father's journal was indeed there, she had to try. At 1:45, she slipped out of the boarding house and made her way casually toward the main street, her heart pounding despite her outward composure. The assayer's office stood just 2 buildings down from the sheriff's office, making it an ideal meeting point. She arrived at the rear of the building to find Travis already waiting, his expression tense. "Any changes?" she asked quietly. "Dawson left a few minutes ago. The office should be empty." He handed her a small key. "This will get you in the back door. I'll keep watch on the street. If anyone heads toward the office, I'll create a distraction. And if I'm caught," his eyes met hers, "I'll say you stole my key. I can't protect you if you're caught red-handed." "I wouldn't expect you to," she replied. "Your position here is too valuable to sacrifice." Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps, or respect. "Be quick," he said. "In and out in 5 minutes." Nora nodded, taking the key. 5 minutes. She waited until Travis had moved to his position at the corner of the building before slipping around to the back of the sheriff's office. The door was just as he'd described, weathered wood with a simple lock. The key turned smoothly, and she was inside. The office was empty, just as Travis had promised. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. Nora moved quickly to the painting of the territorial governor, an unflattering portrait of a jowly man with small, suspicious eyes. Behind it, just as Travis had said, was a small wall safe. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the dial. 18 right. 36 left. 9 right. The safe door swung open. Inside were stacks of papers, a small leather pouch that clinked with what sounded like coins, and a worn leather-bound book. Nora's breath caught as she recognized her father's handwriting on the cover. T. Sullivan Mine Records. She grabbed the journal, quickly leafing through it to confirm it was indeed her father's. The familiar handwriting, the detailed sketches of rock formations and mining operations, this was definitely his work. Near the back, she found entries dated just before his death. Found the mother lode today. Rich copper vein, possibly extending under Reeves' property. This explains the increased interest in my claim. R. Sent men again. Offered to buy me out. When I refused, threats were made. Must speak to territorial office about filing expanded claim. The next entry was even more damning. Evidence that R has been falsifying assay reports. Paying off Dawson to intimidate smaller claim holders. have documented at least 3 cases of claim jumping with D.'s assistance. We'll take evidence to territorial judge next week. Her father had been building a case against Reeves and Dawson, and they'd killed him for it. Footsteps on the front porch jolted her back to the present. Quickly, she tucked the journal inside her shirt, closed the safe, and replaced the painting. As the front door began to open, she ducked behind the desk. "Just saying we need to be careful," came a voice she recognized as Bartholomew Reeves, the mine owner. "That Sullivan woman is asking too many questions." "She'll be handled," replied Marshall Dawson, just like her father was. Nora's blood ran cold. Here was the confession she needed, but she was trapped with no way out except past the 2 men who'd murdered her father. "We should just run her out of town," Reeves was saying. "Or better yet, arrange an accident. Too suspicious so soon after confronting her publicly," Dawson replied. "We need to be smarter this time." Something crashed loudly outside, followed by shouting. Both men hurried back to the door. "What the hell?" Dawson exclaimed. "Runaway horse," came Travis's voice from outside. "Look out!" The distraction worked. Both men rushed outside, leaving Nora a clear path to the back door. She slipped out quietly, locking it behind her, and hurried toward the alley that would take her back to the boarding house. She'd made it halfway when a hand grabbed her arm, pulling her into a narrow space between buildings. She reached for her knife, only to find Travis holding a finger to his lips. "Dawson sent his deputy to circle around back," he whispered. "You were about to walk right into him." They stood pressed together in the narrow space, barely breathing as footsteps approached, then passed by the alley entrance. "Thank you," she whispered when the danger had passed. "Did you find it?" Nora nodded, patting her shirt where the journal was hidden. "It's all here, everything my father discovered about Reeves and Dawson, the falsified essays, the claim jumping, the bribes. Enough to hang them both," Travis said grimly. "I heard them just now. They admitted to killing my father." Her voice cracked slightly. "They were discussing doing the same to me." Travis's expression hardened. "We need to get this evidence to the territorial judge in Prescott, but first we need to get you somewhere safe. Dawson will check the safe soon, and when he finds the journal missing, he'll come for me," Nora finished. "Can you ride?" "Since I was 5. "Good, meet me at the livery at sunset. Bring only what you need. We'll leave under cover of darkness." Nora nodded, though a question burned in her mind. "You're risking everything to help me." "Your position, your investigation, some things are worth the risk," he said simply. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and that dangerous warmth flared within her again. The sound of voices approaching broke the moment. "Go," Travis urged. "Straight to the boarding house and stay there until sunset." Nora slipped away, the journal secure against her skin, and her father's revolver a comforting weight in her pocket. For the first time since arriving in Copper Creek, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for justice, but perhaps for something more. Sunset couldn't come quickly enough. Nora spent the afternoon in her room, packing her few belongings into a small satchel and studying her father's journal more carefully. The evidence was damning, detailed accounts of how Reeves and Dawson had systematically driven out smaller miners, sometimes through intimidation, sometimes through violence disguised as accidents. Her father had been thorough, recording dates, names, and even conversations he'd overheard. The final entry, dated just 2 days before his death, chilled her. "D. knows I'm onto them. Caught him searching my cabin today. Claimed to be investigating a theft, but his eyes gave him away. He's afraid. I've hidden copies of my evidence where they'll never find them. If anything happens to me, N will know what to do." And that was her. But her father hadn't told her where to find any hidden evidence. His last letter had mentioned only the journal itself, which she now possessed. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across her room, Nora tucked the journal securely in her satchel and checked her father's revolver one last time. 6 bullets, she hoped she wouldn't need them, but experience had taught her to be prepared. She was about to leave when a soft knock came at her door. Cautiously, she approached. "Who is it?" "Nancy, madam, with a message." Nora opened the door slightly to find Mrs. Winter's young helper looking nervous. "The deputy says plans have changed," Nancy whispered. "Marshall's men are watching the livery. Meet at the old Sullivan cabin instead. He'll be there with horses." Nora frowned. "Did he say anything else?" Nancy shook her head. "Just to hurry and to be careful." After the girl left, Nora considered the change in plans. The Sullivan cabin, her father's home before his death, lay about a mile outside of town, near his claim. It made sense as an alternate meeting place, but something felt off. Why send a message through Nancy rather than deliver it himself? Still, she had little choice. If Dawson's men were watching the livery, their original plan was compromised. Dusk had settled over Copper Creek by the time Nora slipped out the back of the boarding house. She kept to the shadows, avoiding the main street where lanterns were already being lit and shop windows and saloons were coming alive with evening business. The path to her father's cabin took her past the edge of town, through a small grove of cottonwoods, and up a gentle slope that provided a view of the surrounding valley. In the fading light, she could make out the outline of the cabin, a simple structure her father had built with his own hands when he'd first staked his claim. As she approached, she noticed there was no light inside, no horses tethered nearby. Had Travis not arrived yet? Instinct made her pause at the edge of the clearing. Something wasn't right. The cabin door stood slightly ajar, though she'd locked it herself the last time she'd visited. And there was a stillness about the place that raised the hairs on the back of her neck. Drawing her father's revolver, Nora circled around to approach from the rear of the cabin. A window there would allow her to peer inside before entering. She had almost reached it when a voice called out from the darkness to her left. "Miss Sullivan, how kind of you to join us." Marshall Dawson stepped into view, his gun trained on her. Behind him emerged Bartholomew Reeves, a thin, rat-faced man whose expensive suit seemed out of place in the dusty clearing. "I believe you have something that belongs to me," Dawson continued. "A certain journal that went missing from my safe today." Nora raised her revolver, pointing it steadily at Dawson's chest. "Nothing in that safe belonged to you, Marshall, especially not my father's journal." "Your father was a fool," Reeves spat. "He could have sold his claim and lived comfortably. Instead, he chose to meddle in affairs that didn't concern him. Affairs like murder, theft, corruption." Nora's voice was cold. "He chose to stand against men like you. I'm proud to be his daughter." Dawson's laugh was ugly. "Pride won't save you out here, girl. No one knows you're here. No one will hear the shot when I claim you attacked me and I was forced to defend myself. Just like no one heard the shot when you murdered my partner." The new voice came from behind Nora. Travis stepped into the clearing, his gun drawn and aimed at Dawson. "Blackwood," Dawson growled. "I should have known you were working with her." "I'm working for justice, Marshall, something you abandoned a long time ago." Reeves's hand moved toward his jacket, but Travis's warning was immediate. "Touch that pocket and it'll be the last thing you do." The standoff held, 4 figures in the gathering darkness, weapons drawn and tension crackling in the air. "Drop your gun, Marshall," Travis ordered. "It's over. We have the journal. We have witnesses to your corruption. The territorial judge will have plenty to convict you both." "You're outnumbered, deputy," Dawson replied with a sneer. 2 against 1. "Check your arithmetic," came a female voice from the cabin doorway. An older woman stepped out, a shotgun held confidently in her weathered hands. "I make it 3 against 2. Mrs. Winters," Nora gasped in surprise. The boarding house owner nodded grimly. "Your father was a good man, Miss Sullivan. He helped me keep my place when Reeves here tried to force me out 3 years ago. I owe him a debt." Dawson's eyes darted between the three of them, calculating his odds. "This changes nothing. No court will take the word of a woman, a boarding house keeper, and a deputy with a grudge over mine and Mr. Reeves's." "They might not," Travis agreed, "but they'll certainly listen to this." He pulled a small metal object from his pocket, a tintype camera no bigger than his palm. "New model. Takes photographs without all the usual equipment. I've been documenting your meetings, your payoffs, your threats. Got quite a collection over the past 6 months. Reeves went pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Travis smiled coldly. "The territorial governor's office already has copies. If anything happens to us, they'll know exactly who to blame." For a moment, Nora thought Dawson might risk it anyway. His finger tightened on the trigger, his face contorted with rage. But then, slowly, he lowered his gun. "This isn't over," he hissed. "For you it is," Travis replied. "Mrs. Winters, would you be so kind as to collect their weapons?" As the boarding house keeper moved forward, shotgun still trained on the 2 men, Nora felt a rush of relief so powerful her knees nearly buckled. It was over. They had won. Or so she thought, until a flash of movement caught her eye. Reeves, reaching into his boot for a hidden derringer. "Travis!" she shouted in warning. Everything happened at once. Reeves raised the small pistol. Nora fired without hesitation, her bullet catching him in the shoulder and spinning him around. Dawson seized the opportunity to lunge for his dropped gun, but Mrs. Winters was faster, the butt of her shotgun connecting solidly with his temple and sending him sprawling unconscious to the ground. In the sudden stillness that followed, Reeves clutched his bleeding shoulder, moaning. "You shot me," he said incredulously. "You actually shot me." "Be grateful I aimed for your shoulder," Nora replied, her gun still trained on him. "I was tempted to aim lower." Travis quickly secured both men, using Dawson's own handcuffs for the marshal and rope from the cabin for Reeves. "Nancy delivered your message," Nora said as they worked. "About the change in plans." Travis looked up sharply. "I sent no message. When you didn't arrive at the livery, I feared something had happened. Mrs. Winters told me she'd overheard Nancy talking to one of Dawson's deputies earlier, so we came straight here." "They used the girl to lure me into a trap," Nora realized. "Poor Nancy probably had no idea." "Dawson's treachery runs deep in this town," Mrs. Winters said sadly. "But perhaps now it can begin to heal." Dawn was breaking by the time they reached Prescott, the territorial capital. Travis had requisitioned the marshal's own wagon to transport their prisoners, who'd remained sullenly silent throughout the overnight journey. Mrs. Winters had stayed behind to keep an eye on things in Copper Creek, armed with Travis's spare revolver and a determination that impressed even Nora. The territorial judge, a stern-faced man named Hollister, listened to their evidence with increasing outrage. The journal, Travis's photographs, and their testimonies painted a damning picture of corruption and murder that reached beyond Copper Creek to mining interests throughout the territory. "This will take time to sort out properly," Judge Hollister said when they'd finished. "But I've heard enough to hold these men for trial. Deputy Blackwood, I'm appointing you acting marshal of Copper Creek until a permanent replacement can be found." "Thank you, Your Honor," Travis replied. "Though I may not be the most popular man in town for a while." "Popularity is overrated," the judge said dryly. "Justice, however, is essential." As they left the courthouse, Nora felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief that her father's killers would face justice, satisfaction at having recovered his property, but also a curious emptiness. For months, vengeance had been her sole purpose. Now that it was achieved, what remained? "What will you do now?" Travis asked, as if reading her thoughts. They stood in the morning sunlight, watching as Dawson and Reeves were led away to the territorial prison to await trial. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "My father's claim is mine now. I could work it or sell it." "Do you know anything about mining?" A small smile touched her lips. "Not a thing, but I'm a quick learner." "I don't doubt that," he said, his eyes warm as they studied her face. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with possibilities neither was quite ready to voice. "I should return to Copper Creek," Travis finally said. "There's much to be done. The town deserves a fresh start." Nora nodded. "I'll join you. My father's affairs still need settling, and I'd like to thank Mrs. Winters properly for her help." They purchased fresh horses for the return journey, leaving the wagon and prisoners in the care of the territorial authorities. As they rode side by side along the dusty trail back to Copper Creek, Nora found herself stealing glances at Travis. In the few days she'd known him, he'd upended every assumption she'd made about lawmen, about trust, about her own capacity for. What? She wasn't ready to name it yet. "You're staring," he observed without looking at her. "Just trying to figure you out, Deputy Blackwood." Now he did look at her, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. "And how's that going? You're an enigma. Most men with badges I've encountered have been like Dawson, corrupt or indifferent. You're neither. Perhaps you've just had bad luck with lawmen." "Perhaps," she agreed. "Or perhaps you're the exception that proves the rule." He was quiet for a moment, his expression growing more serious. "After Daniel, my partner, was killed, I nearly turned in my badge. The system seemed too broken, too corrupt to fix from within." "What changed your mind?" "Something my father told me years ago. He said, 'Son, you can curse the darkness or light a candle, but only one of those actions changes anything.'" Nora considered this. "Your father sounds like a wise man." He was. Travis's voice held a note of old grief. "He was a lawman too, killed in the line of duty when I was 15. He believed in justice above all else." "Is that why you became a ranger, to follow in his footsteps?" "Partly," he admitted. "But also because I saw what happened to communities without law, without justice. The strong prey on the weak, the corrupt thrive while good people suffer." "Like what happened in Copper Creek," Nora said softly. "Like what happened to your father," he agreed. "But it doesn't have to stay that way. Towns can change. People can change." Something in his tone made her look at him sharply. "Are we still talking about Copper Creek, Deputy?" A smile played at his lips. "Maybe we're talking about a lot of things, Miss Sullivan." The trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file for a while, but Nora found her thoughts lingering on their conversation. Travis Blackwood was unlike any man she'd met before, principled yet practical, strong yet gentle. And the way he looked at her sometimes, as if he could see past her defenses to something she'd thought long buried. It was unsettling and exhilarating. They made camp that night by a small stream, the stars overhead brilliantly clear in the desert sky. After a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, they sat by the fire in companionable silence. "Your father," Travis said eventually. "In his journal he mentioned hiding copies of his evidence. Any idea where?" Nora shook her head. "He wrote that I would know what to do, but he never told me about any hidden evidence. Maybe it's at the cabin somewhere, or at his claim. I've searched both. If he hid something, he hid it well." She stared into the flames, remembering her father's face, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the perpetual smudge of dirt on his cheek, his hands rough but gentle. He was always clever that way. He'd make these elaborate treasure hunts for my birthday when I was a child. Treasure hunts. He'd hide my gift somewhere and leave a trail of clues for me to follow. The clues were always about things that were special to us, places we'd visited, stories he'd told me, songs we sang together. Travis leaned forward, interest sharpening his features. In his last letter to you, did he mention anything unusual? Anything that might have been a clue rather than just normal correspondence? Nora thought back to the letter, which she'd read so many times she had it nearly memorized. He mentioned the old oak where we used to picnic and the creek where he taught me to fish. Normal reminiscences, I thought. Or landmarks, Travis suggested. Places where he might have hidden something important. The possibility made her sit up straighter. You think the letter itself contained clues? It's worth considering. If he suspected he was in danger, he might have tried to tell you where to find the evidence without being too obvious about it. Nora pulled her satchel closer, removing the folded letter and smoothing it open. Together, they read it by firelight, looking for anything that might be a hidden message. Here, Travis pointed to a passage near the end. Remember the story of the fox and the grapes. Sometimes the sweetest fruit hangs just out of reach, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth climbing for. That was one of his favorite fables, Nora said. He used to tell it to encourage me when I was struggling with something difficult. Was there a particular place associated with that story? Somewhere special to both of you, she thought for a moment, then gasped softly. The old grape arbor. Behind our first cabin, before we moved closer to the mine, there was a wild grape vine that grew up an old oak tree. Pa built a little arbor around it, said someday we'd make our own wine. Where is this arbor? About half a mile from the current cabin, near the creek. We haven't lived there in years, but the arbor might still be standing. Travis nodded decisively. Then that's where we'll look tomorrow. They fell silent again, the fire crackling between them, each lost in their own thoughts. Nora found herself studying Travis's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way the firelight played across his features. You're staring again, he said softly, without looking up, just thinking. About, she hesitated, then decided on honesty. About how you've risked everything to help a stranger. Your job, your investigation, your life. Now he did look at her, his eyes reflecting the flames. You stopped being a stranger to me the moment you stood up to Dawson in the middle of the street, outnumbered and outgunned, but refusing to back down. That wasn't bravery, she said. It was stubbornness. Sometimes they're the same thing. He smiled slightly. And sometimes the people most worth knowing are the ones who don't make it easy. The words echoed what she'd said to him outside the boarding house. I'm not easy to love. Is that why you said you'd work for it every day? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes. His answer was simple, direct. Some things are worth the effort, Nora Sullivan. I think you might be one of them. The raw honesty in his voice made her breath catch. No man had ever spoken to her like this, as if she were precious not despite her difficulties, but because of them, as if her strength and stubbornness were qualities to be admired rather than tamed. I don't know how to respond to that, she admitted. You don't have to, he replied gently. Just know that it's true. He stood then, adding more wood to the fire. We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Nora watched as he spread his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire, maintaining a respectful distance between them. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about his character. Travis Blackwood was a man who understood boundaries, who would wait for invitation rather than assume. As she settled into her own bedroll, staring up at the star-scattered sky, Nora realized with a start that, for the first time in years, she was considering the possibility of letting someone past her carefully constructed defenses. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. Sleep came eventually, but her dreams were filled with grape arbors and hidden treasures, and a pair of storm cloud eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. They reached the old arbor shortly after noon the next day. It stood in a small clearing near the creek, partially collapsed but still recognizable, a wooden framework nearly covered by the wild grapevine that had thrived despite neglect. "This is it," Nora said, dismounting. Memories flooded back as she approached the structure, sitting in its shade while her father worked nearby, helping to harvest the small, tart grapes in the fall, listening to his stories as twilight settled over the land. Travis tied their horses to a nearby tree and joined her. Where would he have hidden something here? Nora circled the arbor, examining it carefully. There was a stone bench he built. She pushed aside some fallen lattice work to reveal a crude bench made of flat stones stacked together. "Here it is." Together, they began examining the bench. Travis ran his hands along the stones, testing each one. "This one's loose," he said, wiggling a stone near the base. Nora knelt beside him as he carefully removed the stone, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside was an oilskin package, wrapped tightly and sealed with wax. "This has to be it," she breathed. Carefully extracting the package, with trembling fingers, she broke the wax seal and unwrapped the oilskin. Inside was a sheaf of papers, maps, contracts, and most damning of all, letters between Reeves and Dawson discussing their arrangement to eliminate competing claims. "This is even more evidence than what was in the journal," Travis said as they examined the documents. "Your father was thorough." "He always was," Nora replied, a catch in her voice. "He used to say if a thing's worth doing, it's worth doing right." Travis gently squeezed her shoulder. "He'd be proud of you, Nora. You finished what he started." She looked up at him, suddenly overwhelmed by the realization that it was truly over. Her father's killers would face justice. His claim was secure. His name would be cleared. "What now?" she whispered, not entirely sure if she was asking about the evidence or something else entirely. "Now we take this to Judge Hollister," Travis replied. "And then—" He paused, his eyes holding hers. "And then we decide what comes next." The way he said, we sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. They remounted and rode toward Copper Creek, the precious evidence secure in Nora's saddlebag. As they crested a rise that gave them a view of the town in the distance, Travis reined his horse to a stop. "What is it?" Nora asked, halting beside him. "Something's wrong," he said, his expression tense. "There's smoke coming from town." Nora followed his gaze and saw it too, a dark plume rising from somewhere near the center of Copper Creek. "That's close to the boarding house," she said, alarm rising in her voice. Without another word, they spurred their horses into a gallop, racing toward town. As they drew closer, they could see people running through the streets, some carrying buckets, others just fleeing the flames. They rode straight to the source of the smoke. The boarding house was engulfed in flames, the fire already spreading to neighboring buildings. "Mrs. Winters!" Nora cried, scanning the crowd for the landlady's familiar figure. A soot-stained man was organizing a bucket line. "She's safe," he called to Nora. Pulled 3 guests out before the roof started to collapse. Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. Another man approached, his expression grim. "Deputy Blackwood," he said to Travis. "This was no accident." Witnesses saw 2 of Marshall Dawson's deputies throw coal oil on the porch and light it. Said they were sending a message to traitors. Travis's face hardened. "Where are they now?" "Holed up in the sheriff's office with about 5 others, all Dawson's men. They've declared you and Miss Sullivan outlaws and themselves the law in Copper Creek." Nora and Travis exchanged looks. Without Dawson and Reeves, they had hoped the corruption would collapse, but it seemed the rot ran deeper than they'd thought. "We need to end this," Travis said quietly. "Once and for all." "How? They outnumber us and they have the advantage of position." Travis scanned the burning buildings, the frightened townspeople, then looked back at Nora. "They have position, but we have something they don't." "What's that?" "The truth. And the people of Copper Creek." He turned to the man who'd brought the news. "Gather everyone in front of the church in 10 minutes. Everyone who's not fighting the fire. It's time this town took a stand." Word spread quickly. As the fire brigade continued their battle with the flames, a crowd gathered in front of the small wooden church that stood at one end of the main street. Men and women, shopkeepers and miners, all looking to Travis with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Travis stood on the church steps, Nora beside him. She could feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he faced the crowd. "Good people of Copper Creek," he began, his voice carrying across the gathered faces. "For too long, this town has been ruled by fear. Marshall Dawson and Bartholomew Reeves have stolen your land, threatened your livelihoods, and even taken lives to maintain their power." A murmur ran through the crowd, agreement from some, skepticism from others. Today, their deputies have set fire to Mrs. Winter's boarding house, not because she committed any crime, but because she dared to stand against corruption. Mrs. Winters herself stepped forward, her face smudged with soot but her eyes blazing. "It's true. They threatened me this morning, said I'd regret helping the deputy and Miss Sullivan." Travis held up the oilskin package. "We have proof of Dawson and Reeves' crimes, proof that Thomas Sullivan gathered at the cost of his life. Proof that can free this town if you have the courage to stand with us." "Why should we risk our necks?" called a voice from the crowd. "Dawson's gone, but his men are still armed and dangerous." "Because this is your town," Nora said, stepping forward, "not theirs. My father believed in Copper Creek. He believed in its people. He died protecting what was right. Will you do any less?" A silence fell over the crowd, broken only by the distant crackling of the fire and the shouts of those still fighting to contain it. Then, from the back, a miner stepped forward. "Sullivan helped me when Reeves tried to run me off my claim. I'm with you." Another man joined him. "Dawson's men beat my brother half to death for refusing to sell his store. Count me in." One by one, then in groups, the people of Copper Creek stepped forward, offering their support. Within minutes, what had been a frightened gathering became a determined force, nearly 30 strong. Travis outlined his plan quickly. Most of the townspeople would approach the sheriff's office from the front, drawing attention, while he and a small group would enter from the rear. Their goal was to capture Dawson's men alive if possible, to stand trial alongside their leaders. "These men must face justice, not vengeance," Travis emphasized. "We're establishing law here today, not replacing one form of tyranny with another." The crowd dispersed to gather weapons and prepare. Nora helped distribute the few firearms available, ensuring those with experience received them. Others armed themselves with tools, pickaxes, shovels, even a blacksmith's hammer. As they made final preparations, Travis pulled Nora aside. "I want you to stay with Mrs. Winters," he said. "Keep the evidence safe." "If something goes wrong, I'm coming with you," she interrupted firmly. "Nora, my father died fighting these men. I won't hide while others risk their lives to finish what he started." Her eyes held his, unwavering. "Besides, I'm a better shot than most of your volunteers." A smile touched his lips despite the gravity of the situation. "That's probably true." He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "Only if you make the same promise," she replied softly. For a moment they stood there, something unspoken passing between them. Then Travis nodded, his hand falling reluctantly away. "Let's finish this," he said. The confrontation at the sheriff's office was brief but intense. The diversionary group at the front, led by the blacksmith and several miners, called for Dawson's men to surrender. When they refused, the rear assault began. Travis, Nora, and 3 others entered through the back window, catching the deputies by surprise. 2 surrendered immediately, but the others fought back. Gunfire erupted, filling the small office with noise and smoke. Nora took cover behind an overturned desk, returning fire only when she had a clear shot. She saw Travis moving with the calm efficiency of a trained lawman, disarming one deputy with a swift blow and dodging the wild shots of another. When it was over, 2 of Dawson's men lay wounded but alive, the others in various states of surrender. The only casualty on their side was one of the miners, who'd taken a bullet in the shoulder but would recover. Travis stood in the center of the office, his gun still drawn but pointed at the floor. "In the name of the territorial authority, you're all under arrest for arson, attempted murder, and insurrection against lawful authority." Outside, a cheer went up from the townspeople, who'd gathered to witness the surrender. As Travis and the volunteers led the prisoners out to be secured in the cells at the back of the office, Nora felt a wave of emotion wash over her: relief, pride, and something deeper she wasn't quite ready to name. That evening, as the town began to recover from the day's events, Nora found Travis sitting alone on the steps of the church, staring up at the stars. "The prisoners are secure," she said, sitting beside him. "Mrs. Winters is organizing a place for everyone who lost their homes in the fire to sleep tonight." Travis nodded. "She's a remarkable woman." "This is a remarkable town," Nora replied. "When given the chance to stand up for what's right, they did. People usually will if someone shows them the way." He turned to look at her, his expression soft in the moonlight. "Your father knew that. So did mine." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the events of the past few days settling around them like dust after a storm. "I sent a telegram to Judge Hollister," Travis said eventually. "He's sending marshals to collect the prisoners and the additional evidence. They should be here by tomorrow afternoon. And then my job here is done." He looked out over the town, where lanterns glowed in windows and people moved with a new sense of purpose. "Copper Creek will need a new marshal, someone who can help rebuild, who understands what they've been through." Nora studied his profile. "Someone like you," a smile touched his lips. "Judge Hollister offered me the position, permanently this time. And will you accept?" He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether there's a reason for me to stay." His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "On whether certain people might be staying too." Nora's heart quickened. "Certain people with mining claims they don't know how to work." "Among other qualities," he agreed, a smile warming his eyes. She looked out at the town, at her father's town, considering. "I could sell the claim," she said thoughtfully. "Use the money to help rebuild what was destroyed today. Maybe open a business of my own." "What kind of business?" "I'm not sure yet. Something useful, something that builds rather than tears down." She met his gaze again. "I've spent so long focused on the past, on justice for my father, I haven't thought much about the future. And now," his question was gentle, patient, "now I'm thinking perhaps the future might be worth investing in. Here in Copper Creek." Travis reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. "I meant what I said, you know, about working for it every day." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I'm considering staying." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the simple touch sending warmth through her. "You're not easy to love, Nora Sullivan, so I've been told. But the things most worth having rarely come easily." He leaned closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "May I?" She nodded. and he closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. Nora found herself responding with a depth of feeling that surprised her hand moving to his cheek, feeling the roughness of his stubble against her palm. When they finally parted, she kept her hand on his face, studying him in the moonlight. "I can't promise to make it easy," she whispered. "I'm not asking for easy," he replied. "I'm asking for a chance." And there, on the steps of the church with Copper Creek spread out before them like a promise waiting to be fulfilled, Nora Sullivan, who had come seeking justice and found so much more, gave her answer in the form of another kiss. 5 years later, Nora stood on the porch of the house she and Travis had built on her father's land, watching as their 3-year-old daughter, Ellie, chased butterflies in the garden. The town of Copper Creek spread out below them, transformed from the corrupt settlement it had once been into a thriving community known for its fair mining practices and strong sense of justice. The Sullivan Blackwood Mining Company, which Nora had founded with the help of Travis and several of the miners who'd stood with them that fateful day, was now the largest employer in the county. They operated on a profit-sharing model that Thomas Sullivan would have approved of, one that ensured every worker benefited from the wealth they helped create. Travis himself had served as marshal for 3 years before passing the badge to his deputy, a young man he'd trained personally. Now he divided his time between helping Nora run the company and serving as a territorial judge, riding circuit to bring justice to communities beyond Copper Creek. "Mama, look," Ellie called, holding up a wildflower with the serious concentration only a child can muster. Her dark hair and storm-cloud eyes were so like her father's that it sometimes made Nora's heart ache with love. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Nora replied, smiling as her daughter resumed her explorations. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention to the road, where Travis was returning from his 2-week circuit. Ellie heard it too and abandoned her flowers to race toward the gate, bouncing with excitement. "Papa's home! Papa's home!" Travis dismounted in one fluid motion, sweeping his daughter into his arms and spinning her around as she squealed with delight. Watching them, Nora felt the familiar warmth that had become the cornerstone of her life, a feeling that had once seemed as impossible as the idea of finding justice in a corrupt mining town. As Travis carried Ellie toward the house, his free arm reached for Nora, pulling her into their embrace. "I missed you both," he murmured, kissing her softly. "We missed you too," she replied. "Especially since someone has been asking for her bedtime story every night." "Papa tells the best stories," Ellie declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. Travis laughed. "Better than Mama." "I find that hard to believe. Mama's stories don't have enough horses," Ellie explained seriously. Nora raised an eyebrow. "I'll have to work on that." Later, after Ellie was tucked into bed with a story featuring an abundance of horses, Nora and Travis sat together on the porch, watching as the lights of Copper Creek twinkled in the gathering dusk. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him in a position that had become as natural as breathing. "Mrs. Winters is retiring," Travis said, "selling the boarding house to Nancy and her husband." "Good for them," Nora replied. "Nancy's worked hard for this opportunity." "Mrs. Winters said something interesting before I left town," Travis continued, a smile in his voice. "She said she knew from the moment she saw us together that first day, you hiding behind the water trough, me standing up to Dawson, that we were meant for each other." Nora laughed softly. "Apparently everyone knew before we did, even my father in his way." "Oh, remember what he wrote in his last letter, about the fox and the grapes, how the sweetest fruit hangs just out of reach, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth climbing for." She looked up at her husband, love warming her eyes. I think he knew I'd need someone stubborn enough to climb for what was worth having. Travis smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You were certainly out of reach at first, all prickly and suspicious. I had good reason to be. You did, he agreed, and I meant what I promised, to work for it every day. She turned in his arms to face him fully. Have I been worth the work, Marshall Blackwood? His answer was in his eyes before he spoke. Every moment, every struggle, every day. He cupped her face in his hands. You're still not easy to love, Nora Sullivan Blackwood. And you're still willing to work for it, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Until my last breath, he promised, sealing the words with a kiss that held 5 years of memories and a lifetime of promises yet to be kept. As the stars emerged one by one above Copper Creek, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a woman bent on vengeance to one surrounded by love and purpose. She had come seeking justice for her father, but had found something far more precious. A home, a family, and a man who saw her strength not as a challenge to overcome but as a gift to cherish. Life wasn't easy. Love wasn't easy. But as Travis had taught her, the things most worth having rarely were. And every day, true to his word, he worked for it. They both did, together.